fog wasn't just fog to me. It was something alive, a thing that breathed and watched, as though its every particle carried eyes. My name is Oliver Shadow, and this is my story, not the kind you'd want to hear before sleeping. Or perhaps exactly that. Willow Creek had whispered its secrets to me long before I arrived. A small town draped in cobblestone charm and ancient decay. It was the kind of place where silence held a weight. The locals never looked past their own shadows, afraid of what stared back. I arrived there not as a tourist, not even as an investigator, but as someone who needed answers. A man with scars carved so deep that even the truth couldn't heal. The channel, Voices in the Mist, wasn't just a job. It was my lifeline, a public diary where I spoke into the void, chasing horrors most would run from. The night I stepped out of my car, the chill of the air caught me like a hook. The headlights of the rental fought a losing battle against the swirling fog, its tendrils curling over the windshield as if claiming the space. I grabbed my recorder, my only witness to whatever lay ahead. "This is Oliver Shadow," I whispered into the device. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Reporting from Willow Creek. The fog here feels like wet silk, alive and oppressive. If you're listening to this, you should know I might be in too deep already." The streets of Willow Creek welcomed me like a stranger at a wake, quiet, cold, and filled with unspoken rules. Narrow lanes weaved between old wooden houses, their shutters drawn tight, as if the town itself feared being watched. I walked to the local cafe, its dim sign swaying in the breeze. The moment I stepped inside, the room stiffened. Conversations hushed mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths, and every set of eyes turned toward me. Just passing through, I lied with a tight smile. My footsteps echoed louder than I wanted, and as I reached the counter, I felt the weight of their stares drilling into my back. The woman behind the counter hesitated before serving me. Her hands moved quickly, pouring coffee into a chipped mug without a word. I could see the questions in her eyes. "Who are you? Why are you here?" But she wouldn't ask. Nobody would. A raspy voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You won't find what you're looking for, stranger." I turned toward the source. An old man sat hunched in the corner, nursing a steaming cup. His face was lined like the bark of a weathered tree, and his eyes, sharp and knowing, didn't match the frailty of his body. "I haven't told you what I'm looking for," I said, taking a step closer. The man chuckled, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "You don't have to. You've got the look. The fog called you, didn't it?" The room seemed to darken at his words, or maybe it was just my imagination. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "What do you know about the fog?" His lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a whisper so soft it barely carried, he said, "The mist doesn't like to be questioned. You dig too deep, and you'll regret it. We all have." Before I could press further, a distant sound swept through the room, a low, mournful wail that prickled my skin. The cafe fell silent, even the old man stiffening. I glanced toward the fogged windows, but there was nothing to see beyond the gray haze. "You'd best leave before it notices you," the man muttered, his tone sharper now, almost fearful. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. As I walked back to my car, the chill of the air felt different, heavier. The fog was thicker now, pressing against the windows like a living thing. And in that moment, I felt an undeniable sensation, like something was watching me from the mist. The municipal library was a relic, its wooden doors heavy with age and secrets. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decaying paper, a fitting atmosphere for the kind of truths I was searching for. The librarian, a frail woman whose gaze lingered on me for a second too long, barely spoke as she guided me to the archives. "No one comes here anymore," she muttered, before leaving me alone with rows of neglected files. I worked my way through stacks of brittle newspapers and faded records. At first, the patterns were subtle disappearances scattered across decades, a few odd mentions of the fog, but as I dug deeper, the connections began to solidify. Every disappearance happened during the autumn equinox. Always. Farmers, shopkeepers, children, even entire families sown by one. They were swallowed by the mist. The reports were eerily similar. No witnesses, no sounds, just empty spaces where people used to be. One file stood out. It was older, its edges frayed and browned with time. It detailed the story of Eliza Harth, a young woman who had vanished 50 years ago. But unlike the others, Eliza hadn't simply disappeared. She'd been investigating the fog. Her diary, found among her belongings, was included in the file. As I read it, a chill ran through me. The mist protects, but it also chooses, she had written in bold, jagged letters. It watches us as much as we watch it. If you stare too long, it will look back. The words felt like a warning meant for me. Eliza's entries grew darker as I flipped through the pages. She wrote about whispers in the night, shadowy figures that moved just beyond the edges of her vision. She described the fog as a sentient being, one that demanded tribute in exchange for the town's safety. One passage stopped me cold. Tonight, I saw him. A man in the mist, his eyes like hollow lights. He said my namino with a voice, but with the silence between breaths. I fear the Watcher knows what I've done. The Watcher. The name sent a shiver down my spine. The more I read, the more I felt a connection to Eliza's shared obsession, a shared madness. She had tried to confront the fog, to understand its nature, but her story ended abruptly. No explanation, just an empty page, as if she had been taken mid-thought. By the time I left the library, the sun had set, and the fog was thicker than ever. The weight of Eliza's words hung heavy in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that the fog wasn't just a passive observer. As I reached my car, I saw someone standing at the edge of the mist. The shape was indistinct, but its presence was undeniable. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. When I finally blinked, it was gone. But the unease lingered, burrowing deeper into my chest. Eliza had been right. The mist was alive. And now, it knew my name. Sleep had become a stranger. My nights were spent staring at the ceiling, ears straining for sounds that didn't belong. The fog outside my window seemed to breathe, pressing against the glass as though testing its strength. I tried to rationalize its exhaustion, stress, maybe even the power of suggestion. But then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, like the murmur of a distant conversation just beyond hearing, but they grew louder, clearer, until they formed words. Words I didn't want to hear. Oliver. The voice was low, guttural, and impossibly close. My pulse hammered as I sat up, clutching the recorder on the bedside table. It was still running, capturing everything. I rewound the tape, my fingers trembling. There, it was a voice. Unmistakable, dragging my name through the static like claws on glass. I felt a cold draft brush against my neck, and the air in the room seemed to thicken. Slowly, I turned toward the window. There it was, a silhouette standing in the mist just beyond the glass. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its gaze, piercing through the barrier between us. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The figure seemed to grow darker, its edges blurring into the fog until it was a shadow with no discernible shape. And then, without warning, it stepped closer. The mist followed it like a shroud, wrapping around its form as it advanced. My breath hitched as the distance between us closed. And then, it stopped. We stared at each other, though I couldn't see its eyes. But I felt them, like burning coals, pressing into my soul. The room filled with a deafening silence, and for a moment, I thought the world had stopped. My chest tightened, and just as I thought I would suffocate under the weight of its presence, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The words weren't spoken aloud, they were in my head, reverberating like an echo in a vast, empty cavern. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The fog outside had retreated slightly, as if satisfied with its warning, but the dread remained, coiled tightly around my chest. I spent the rest of the night listening to the recording, replaying the moment over and over. The voice was there, undeniable proof that I wasn't losing my mind, or worse, that I was, and it didn't matter. By morning, I was more determined than ever. The Watcher knew me now, but I wasn't going to back down. Eliza's unfinished story haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence here wasn't a coincidence. The answers were in Willow Creek, buried beneath layers of fear and silence, and I was going to find them no matter what the mist demanded of me. The diary wasn't just a collection of notes. It was a mirror. The more I read, the more I saw myself reflected in Eliza Harth's word-sure fears, her obsessions, her relentless pursuit of the unknown. One entry stood out, written in a hurried scroll. "Oliver, he will come. He carries the same weight I do." My blood ran cold. It was my name, clear as day, written decades before I had even heard of Willow Creek. The thought clawed at my mind. Was it a coincidence? Or was there a deeper, darker connection tying us together? I searched for anything that might explain it, and that's when I stumbled upon another detail that chilled me to the bone. Among the records in the library, I found a faded photograph of a man who looked eerily familiar. He was younger, his face etched with determination, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. It was my grandfather. He had been in Willow Creek decades ago, investigating the same fog, the same disappearances. And just like Eliza, he had vanished without a trace. A wave of nausea hit me as the realization sank in. This wasn't just a story I had stumbled upon, it was my inheritance. The fog had been waiting for me, just as it had waited for Eliza. Eliza's diary grew more frantic in its final entries, detailing her own descent into the mist's grasp. Last night, the whispers were louder. They called my name over and over, like a chant. I can't tell if they're inside my head or outside my window, maybe both. She described seeing shadowy figures in the fog, just as I had, their forms dissolving and reappearing as though they were part of the mist itself. But the most haunting passage was this: the Watcher doesn't just take, it demands. I offered my life last night. I begged it to end this nightmare, to spare the town, but it just stood there, silent, watching. It wants more than a life. It wants something deeper. The words seemed to pulse on the page, as if they carried a residual energy from the moment they were written. I felt the weight of them in my chest, a pressure that only grew as I realized what they implied. Eliza had tried to bargain with the Watcher and failed, and now it was my turn to face the same impossible choice. The more I pieced together, the more the weight of it all crushed me. My grandfather's disappearance, Eliza's descent into madness, the same mist, the same Watcher, the same cycle. It wasn't just a town that had been marked by the Foggit, it was a curse that ran through my bloodline. The Watcher had been waiting for me, waiting for someone to uncover the truth, to come close enough to see it. I had thought I was investigating the town, but it was the town that had been investigating me. That night, the fog seemed to have a life of its own, curling and shifting as if aware of my every move. I couldn't escape it. Everywhere I went, it followed, pressing against the windows, creeping into my thoughts, suffocating me. I wasn't just hearing the whispers now, I was feeling them, scratching at my mind, pulling at my sanity. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't stop thinking about Eliza's final words. It wants more than a life. It wants something deeper. What could it want from me? What could I offer? As I sat alone in the dark of my hotel room, staring at the recorder in Eliza's diary. A thought clawed its way into my mind. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about sacrifice. Maybe the Watcher didn't want me to give up my life. Maybe it wanted something I didn't yet understand, something I wasn't ready to face. Suddenly, I heard it. The voice from the recorder. Faint at first, but unmistakable.
Oliver.
My heart pounded. The voice wasn't on the tape this time. It was in the room with me. I looked up, but the room was empty. Just the shadows dancing in the dim light. And yet, I could feel Ethan's overwhelming presence, like a million eyes staring from the dark. The figure from the mist appeared in the corner of the room. It was taller than before, its form shifting in and out of focus, its face obscured by the fog that surrounded it. I could feel its eyes scald, distant and infinite, burning into me. "You're getting too close," the voice echoed in my mind. The words not spoken but felt, like an invasive thought. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The weight of its gaze pinned me in place. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. All I could do was watch as the mist thickened around me, curling in on itself, forming shapes that seemed almost human. Face pale, contorted in anguish, floated in the mist, their eyes wide, pleading, and then disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. "What do you want from me?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. The Watcher's form shifted again, a low, rasping breath seeming to come from all directions at once. "It's too late for you," it whispered. "Too late for all of you. The cycle cannot be broken." The room seemed to collapse around me, the mist swirling faster, pressing in, until all I could hear was the deafening sound of my own heartbeat. And then, just as quickly as it had arrived, it was gone. The room was empty again, the air thick with the lingering taste of fear. But I knew one thing now. The Watcher wasn't just a creature of the fog. It was a part of this place, a part of me, and it was calling me, dragging me into its depths. The next day, I returned to the library, driven by a grim resolve. Eliza's words replayed in my mind, over and over. "The mist protects, but it also chooses. If you look long enough, it will look back." I wasn't just looking anymore. I was being pulled. Among the dusty records, I found maps of the town dating back centuries. The older ones showed something the newer ones didn't: a forested area on the outskirts, marked only with an ominous symbol. A spiral. Eliza's diary had mentioned it too. The spiral marks the end and the beginning. The Watcher dwells where the mist is born. I knew where I had to go. The drive to the edge of town felt surreal. The road narrowed as I approached the forest, the fog thickening everywhere, until my headlights were nearly useless. When I finally parked, the mist enveloped the car, muting the world outside. I stepped out, clutching Eliza's diary in one hand and my recorder in the other. The air was colder here, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "This is Oliver Shadow," I said into the recorder, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I'm at the edge of Willow Creek, heading into the spiral. If you're hearing this, it means I've either found the truth or I've disappeared like the others." The forest was silent. Unnaturally so. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my footsteps crunching on the damp ground. The trees loomed above me, their twisted branches forming grotesque shapes in the dim light. As I walked, the spiral began to reveal itself. It wasn't just a symbol on a map, it was real, etched into the ground with eerie precision. The pattern was massive, stretching across the forest floor, its grooves filled with blackened earth. At the center stood an altar, ancient and weathered, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. The pull was too strong. The air grew colder as I stood before the altar. The fog around me thickened, swirling faster, and then, without warning, it stopped. The silence was absolute, oppressive. And then I saw it. The Watcher. It emerged from the mist, its form towering and otherworldly. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were pale, glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through me. The fog curled around it like a living thing, obscuring its features, but not its presence. "You've come far," the voice said, resonating in my mind. "But you cannot change what is." I stepped closer, gripping the diary like a lifeline. "I'm not here to change it," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I'm here to understand it." The Watcher tilted its head, a movement that felt almost human, but was undeniably alien. "Understanding comes with a price," it whispered. "What price?" I demanded, my breath fogging in the cold air. The Watcher didn't answer. Instead, the mist began to shift, forming shapes around Mephises, bodies, shadows of those who had disappeared. "You seek truth," the Watcher said. "But truth is not a gift, it is a burden." The figures in the mist reached out to me, their expressions pleading, desperate. I felt the weight of their gazes, their pain, their fear. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice cracking. The Watcher's form grew darker, its edges dissolving into the fog. "A soul for a soul," it said. "The cycle must continue." The Watcher's words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. "A soul for a soul." The mist around me pulsed with an almost rhythmic force, as if the forest itself awaited my answer. The faces in the fog, those of the lost, stared at me, their eyes hollow, their expressions frozen in anguish. I wanted to scream, to demand another way, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was no other way. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The Watcher's form seemed to ripple, growing darker and more oppressive. "The cycle will remain unbroken," it said, its voice echoing in my mind like 1,000 whispers. "The mist will take more. The price will grow." My hands trembled as I clutched Eliza's diary. The pages seemed heavier now, as if the weight of her story was merging with mine. I thought of the people who had disappeared, their families left with questions, their lives erased as if they had never existed. I thought of Eliza, her words etched into my mind. "It wants more than a life. It wants something deeper. What if I offer myself?" I said, my voice barely audible. The mist stilled. The faces in the fog faded, their forms dissolving into nothingness. For a moment, it felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The Watcher's glowing eyes fixed on me, their pale light piercing through the darkness. "You would give yourself to save them?" it asked, its tone a mixture of curiosity and disdain. I nodded, though every fiber of my being screamed against it. If it ends the cycle, if it spares the town, then yes. The Watcher stepped closer, its form towering over me. The air grew colder, and I felt the pressure of its presence bearing down on me. "You misunderstand," it said. "The cycle cannot end. Sacrifice will not break it. But your offering may delay it." "Delay it, not end it." The words hit me like a blow. "And if I refuse?" I asked again, though the answer was already clear. The Watcher tilted its head, its form flickering like a dying flame. "The mist will grow. It will take more. It will not stop." I thought of the town, of the people I had met, the old man at the cafe, the librarian, the faces of the lost. I thought of Eliza and my grandfather, both swallowed by the fog. I thought of Lucas. The memory of my brother's disappearance hit me like a tidal wave, the image of his jacket lying in the mist, the sound of that voice. "You couldn't save him." Tears burned my eyes as I stepped forward, my decision made. "Take me," I said, my voice breaking. "But leave the others. Leave the town." The Watcher's form loomed closer, its presence enveloping me like a shroud. "Very well," it said, its voice softer now, almost gentle. "The mist will remember this. The fog thickened around me, cold and suffocating. I felt it pressing against my skin, seeping into my lungs, my mind. The world around me dissolved into white, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, I heard the voices. They were louder now, clearer, as if they were all speaking at once. They called my name, not in fear or anger, but in gratitude. The faces of the lost reappeared, their expressions softening, their forms fading into the light. The Watcher's eyes burned brighter, and then they too disappeared, leaving only the mist. I woke to the sound of birds. For a moment, I thought it was a dream. The forest around me was quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt since I arrived in Willow Creek. The mist was gone, no tendrils curling through the trees, no oppressive weight in the air, just sunlight streaming through the branches and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I was lying in the center of the spiral, Eliza's diary still clutched in my hand. My body felt heavy, my mind hollow, as if the fog had taken something from me that I couldn't name. But I was alive. The faces I had seen in the mist, the lost souls, they were gone too. Freed. I could feel it, like a quiet hum in the back of my mind. Whatever had tied them to this place had been severed. I stood slowly, my legs trembling beneath me, and made my way back to the car. The drive into town was surreal. The streets looked the same, but something was different. The air was lighter, the shadows less menacing. At the cafe, the old man from the corner was waiting for me. He didn't say anything as I entered, just nodded once, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. "You did it," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "The fog's gone." I wanted to correct him, to tell him it wasn't gone, just waiting. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded and sat across from him, the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a shroud. That night, back at the inn, I opened Eliza's diary again. The pages felt different now, heavier, as if they carried the weight of the town's history. Near the back, I found something new, a sentence written in fresh ink, in handwriting that wasn't mine. "You have delayed the cycle, but it will return. The Watcher always remembers." A chill ran through me as I read the words. The Watcher wasn't finished with me. I had bought the town time, but at what cost? As I stared at the words, a faint whisper brushed against my ear. "Oliver." I turned sharply, but the room was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, a shadow at the edge of my vision. The next morning, I left Willow Creek. The fog didn't follow me, but the weight of it did. I could still feel it, like a phantom presence in the back of my mind. The town had returned to its uneasy normalcy, but I knew it wouldn't last. The Watcher was patient. It had waited decades before, and it would wait again. As for me, I wasn't the same. The whispers had left a mark, not on my skin, but on my soul. Every shadow felt like a threat, every silence a warning. I continued my work on Voices in the Mist, sharing the story of Willow Creek with my audience. But I left out the part about my sacrifice, about the spiral, about the Watcher's final words. Some truths were too dangerous to share. Even now, as I record this, I can feel it watching. The mist may have receded, but it's not gone. It never will be. The cycle isn't broken. It's only delayed. And the next time it returns, I'm not sure I'll be able to stop it.